I'm Brian and welcome to Vinyl Paints, and in this video we'll be painting Akuma, Ken, and Ryu, or is it Ryu?
Ryu?
From Street Fighter 2 HD Remix by Udon Studios. And I realize I've been doing a lot of Street Fighter. It's a little bit odd because I like Street Fighter, I like the animated, the anime, and I love the anime movie, but it's not something I spend a lot of time with, so it is a little surprising to me to see I've done so many Street Fighter characters lately. I think it's just that these Udon characters lend themselves to traditional cell animation very well. When I first started painting, I didn't really have an instructor or a guide or any sort of knowledge. I just tried to reverse engineer all the information from cells that I had in my collection, and I made a lot of mistakes. So in this video, I kind of want to look back on what I wish I knew when I first started cell painting.
Use my knowledge, I beg you. You're the Sith Lord.
One of the first things I wish I knew when I began cell painting is probably one of the most important, and that is you're probably going to have to add water to your paint. If you've ever watched a video of someone cell paint, you notice that they're not really painting, they're not doing brush strokes, they're more like manipulating or almost water bending the paint around there. They're kind of pushing it from the center or pushing it on the edges. And in order to do that, you need a nice consistency to your paint. You kind of want to get the consistency of like whole milk or a very dense, like a cream. You still want it to be able to flow smoothly, but not so much that it's just watery and you're washing out the pigment. It does take a little bit of fine adjustment. I usually do a 5-to-1 ratio with most of my paints, and it works perfectly. That's 5 parts color to 1 part distilled water. I use distilled water because there's less impurities in them, and I find that I get a more consistent result. And I wish I knew that I was supposed to have my paint at this consistency when I first started, because like I said, I was getting cell warping, just very almost glass painter type backgrounds where it was very, very thick in places and just not a nice finish. It does take a little bit of experimentation to find that balance, but I wish I knew that, because I did my first few paintings, it was just me just spreading that paint on there and hoping for the best. I had no clue when I first started cell painting. I pretty much reverse engineered my cell paintings and kind of started to ask my questions, well, why isn't this working like that does? And one of the things I didn't know was proper paint technique. You're not really supposed to paint like you would on a canvas. You're more pushing the water. And although this might seem obvious, to someone who had no experience cell painting, it was a major aha moment when I found out, oh, you just kind of got to push it and kind of let it flow. And that's why the second part of this tip is the dip pen. I wasted countless amounts of money getting finer and finer brushes, trying to make my life easier to get into little crevices. And because cells don't have a lot of grip, it can move. The paint can really take off on you.
Pulp can move, baby! Why can't you eat a real breakfast?
So that makes staying within the lines and within the edges and small nooks really difficult. So one of the things I learned, which I wish I learned much earlier, was using a dip pen for small areas, for nooks, for crannies, for eyes, for small details. It's become a bit of a lifesaver, and it saved me from a lot of pain. And I wish I knew that when I first started cell painting. Another thing I wish I had done right from the beginning was put all my colors on a color chart. You'll see me refer to these color charts multiple times in the video. You'll see me pull out this thing, and it's got a color chart pretty much just has all my paints and all the different colors that they make. So even if I can't find the exact paint that I want, at least I have an idea of what it's going to look like, especially when it's dried. Wet cell paint looks very different from dry cell paint, especially because you got to remember, you're going to be looking at it from the opposite side through the cell, and that gives it a different finish than what you might expect. So having color chart has been very useful. The mistake I made was, even though I started it when I first began, I didn't put all the colors down at once. I kind of put colors as I use them. And there were times, especially on the Kami animation, where I realized, oh, what does this color look like? Or I need this color, and I didn't have one on the chart. And I had colors that I hadn't really seen how they dried. It probably would have saved me a little bit of time and effort. When I first started cell painting, I jumped in. I didn't really know too much about it. I just kind of figured I'd be able to learn it as I went. And if I ever got stuck, I'd be able to find resources online in order to help me on my process.
No, not a chance. No way. Wrong. Not this time.
I was wrong. There's not really a great archival resources for cel painting, at least the process. So when I was going through all these historical videos, a lot of the times they were talking about the animation process. And in some of the older videos I watched, you would see animators on their port keys painting. But I think this wasn't like a normal practice. It definitely isn't later on once they moved the cel process to Korea and all these other places. But at the time, probably that animator was doing double duties. He was painting and he was drawing. But this actually was a great kind of an accidental discovery because it created one of the things that I think is one of the most useful tools for a cel painter, especially if you're just doing individual paintings, and that is using the light table as a tool to see spots that you missed, inconsistencies in the paint, because you really can't tell, but when the light's going through it, you'll be able to spot, oh, there's not enough pigment in this, I should do another coat on this. For myself personally, I can't keep around mixed colors because I just don't have the extra paint. Whenever I make a batch of paint, it's usually just enough to do the painting. So I don't have any of that color to go back to. So it's very important that I know that when it's finished, I actually have a relatively finished piece that can actually go on a background without the image coming through. One of the things that I wish I knew when I first started, not coming from a paint background, sometimes I struggle to get the right shadow. Like I'll use a skin tone and then be like, okay, now I need a darker version of that skin tone, and I'll try to mix something, and sometimes I nail it out of the park, and then other times I'm like, this didn't turn out so good. So I needed to find a reliable method of creating shadows. And the method that I think works most effectively is adding a little bit of brown to your color. So if you mix the skin tone and then you add a little bit of brown, you're gonna find that, oh, this is a good shadow tone. More often than not, it works and it looks really good. That's why it's important to have a robust set of brown. I can't stress enough the importance of having different contrast levels, because if you want it darker or you want it lighter, I don't use my tune tones very often, but I use my tune tones browns all the time. This next one is kind of forbidden knowledge, but before you go and jump ahead and just listen to what I'm going to say and then go out and buy it, I hope you'll listen to my full explanation so that you understand why I'm hesitant to even share this information. When I first started cel painting, I had an idea of how I was going to get the paint on the cel, but I had no idea on how I was going to get the line art onto the cel. And I experimented and tried all sorts of things. I did Posca paint markers, Sharpie paint markers, Micron, Faber-Castell acrylic inks. I did India inks, Sumi inks, all in an attempt to discover what works best. And eventually that led me to the dip pen. I always kind of knew a dip pen would work because I saw it in classical videos, but I was just very sloppy with the dip pen. I still think I need to improve with the dip pen, but it was one of those things where I was kind of hesitant to use it. So I spent so much money chasing other ways to avoid learning and using the dip pen. And had I known about rapidograph or technical pens, the ones I use are Koh-i-Noor, I probably could have saved a lot of money. Now, mind you, these pens are expensive, they cost a lot of money, but I wouldn't have had to have spent as much money to get here. So here's my explanation on why I really don't think you should go out and get a rapidograph or a technical pen right away. I think it's going to immediately limit you in terms of what you can do as a cel painter. I think of it as it's a very useful tool and to have that ability, and it will save you money. I think it could replace the Posca paint marker, all these different paint markers and all these different pens, but it doesn't replace the dip pen. You can't do colored lines without a dip pen. You need that. And I wouldn't have learned how to do that if I didn't spend 2 years using the dip pen for pretty much all my line art. And in fact, even when you want some movement or some different flow and consistency in your line, you can't do that with a technical pen. That's something you need a dip pen for. Also, when you use a dip pen, because I started out with just doing the blacks with it, you're gonna find that Sumi ink and India ink are a lot easier to ink with, and having all that experience using the dip pen, well, I wouldn't say it made it very easy, but it made it easier for me to start using paint to do my line work on the inside. Like I said, it's very tempting to just say, this is the quick, this is the easy, this will save me all that effort. And I think it could save you that money, but I would still recommend that start with the dip pen, start doing your inside lines, before you ever go to a technical pen. The technical pen I kind of almost view as like a replacement for a photocopier. The lines are going to be very straight. They're not going to necessarily have a lot of fluidity and motion. They're always going to be a very consistent size, which is good if you're doing animation. Absolutely. But if you want to have those colors on the inside, if you want to have those colored outlines, you can't do that with this. This one here isn't something I wish I knew when I first started painting, but it's just more of a creative solution that I've kind of come up with to add a little bit more depth to my faces when I cel paint. One of the things I like to do is I like to go over the line art on the back side of the cel with the dark shadow tone, just to add a little bit of depth and just go over those lines that are defined on the face, just to give it a little bit of contrast so that the face pops a little bit more. I find it just helps the characters feel less flat and a little bit more vibrant. One of the things I didn't understand as it relates to cel painting was cel fogging. And in the context of what I'm explaining right now is every time you put a cel on top of another cel, as you put multiple layers, you get a little bit of a darkening of the back image or a bit of a fogging, and that can kind of be problematic. And I think it's especially more of a problem now because a lot of the cels that you can still have access to, or if you're using an alternative like Duralar wet medium, a lot of these things are a lot thicker than the traditional cels of yesteryear. So I have cels from the Superman animated series that are like 5 cels deep, and there's not as much there's not as much fogging as like 2 layers of Duralar. So this is something that you have to be aware of in your planning process and when you're moving things around, because you might have to keep all your characters or certain parts of your characters on a certain layer of the cel and have everything else on a back layer. It just requires a little bit more of a thought process, but that's something I definitely wish I would have known when I first started cel painting. When I first started cel painting, I kind of struggled with making the paint less transparent. And I thought the only way to avoid that was to add more and more layers of color. In fact, you're probably going to find a video out there on my channel of me saying, oh, it doesn't matter what color you use, you just want to darken it up. And I'm pretty sure I got incredibly lucky that I just happened to use a red on a red, so it wasn't noticeable. But eventually, as the Cuphead video will show you, I wasn't always so lucky. So here's one of the things I didn't know when I first started painting, and that I've kind of learned along the way. So as you can see here, in Ken's fireball and his hair, it looks great when it's white in the background. But as you can see here, even on the leg, as I move it up, it's getting a little bit darker. It's hard to notice, but usually on darker colors like reds and blacks and grays, you're fine. But look at the fireball. You see it? It almost looks like it's like filling up a life meter. And that isn't because there isn't enough paint on there. In fact, I think there's 2 coats of yellow on there. It just has to do with the pigment density of the color. And of course, this is going to affect a lot of your yellows and reds and sometimes your lighter skin tones. Even though it is affecting the skin tone here, it's not as noticeable as the yellows. But now, look, I put a white sheet and you can see, boom, it's gone. So learning from this terrible mistake I made during Cuphead where I tried using black on yellow, yep, that happened. That was a mistake. So I don't really want that muddy look from the background on the fireball, especially because I spent so much time painting it. So I think I'm going to use a white here to kind of just fill it in. These little strips of white and black will be really helpful to kind of shove behind your painting so that you can kind of like test them to see which is the right color for the look that you want. I'm going to try using the white to kind of fill in Ken here. And so I'm just going to use a little bit of white paint, fill in the background, fill in those areas where the paint is really being affected by the background, just to get the color brightness that I want out of it. I had a lot of fun with this painting. Not only did I get to pretty much put into practice everything I talked about in this video, which makes it a really good choice of paintings for this video, but I also got to try a couple of little new things. With Akuma, I got to try the Lopogazai paints from Japan. That's really exciting, and I look forward to sharing my review of those paints with you. As well as, it was interesting just to do elements, the fire elements on Ken. I had never really done anything other than characters, so trying to do a flame and the little ambers that come off of it was just a neat experience, and I think it turned out very well. I'm going to try to squeeze out another video before the new year, but in case I don't, take care of yourselves, have a happy new year, and once again, thanks for watching. I'm Brian, and this is Vinyl Paints.